out to listen and for being a part of this weekend's event, which is the 40 hours of Eucharistic adoration. So this morning we had the opportunity to talk about the everyday miracle of the Eucharist. And tonight I'm going to talk about another everyday miracle, which is family life, everyday family life, which is one of the hardest things that any of us are ever called to. So whether you're a mom or your grandma, or you've got nieces and nephews in your life, or you participate in religious ed programs, all of us have something to give the younger generations. And it's so important that we take that job seriously. And yet, as Father mentioned, many of us experience frustration in doing that because they're not always listening. We know our faith is important, and we know we want to pass that faith on to the next generation. And yet, it's so important that we do that. We know it's important, and yet at the same time, we're sometimes met with a lot of resistance. The world is often at odds with us in that way. And so I want to talk to you a little bit today about some different things about Catholic family life. First of all, recognizing that it's a messy thing, that it can be a complicated thing, it can be a painful thing, but that our family is so important and our faith is so important. So we're going to be talking about how we can pass on the faith to the next generation. So just to give you a little bit of an introduction to me, my name's Danielle and I'm from New Hampshire. So I come to you from New Hampshire. I'm so grateful to the welcome that you've given me here in your parish community here this weekend. And I'm, as Father mentioned, the mother of 8 children. They now range in age from 18 to 30, so they're grown for the most part. But there were some crazy years there when they were all under the age of 12, and so there's a lot involved in that. I also am one of 9 children myself, so I had the blessing of growing up in a very faithful Catholic family, being given that gift of faith from the very beginning of my life, and I'm so grateful for that. But when I became a parent myself, one of the things that I looked back on was my own parents and the way that they did successfully raise me and my siblings in the faith, because I'm one of 9, and all 9 of us as adults are practicing our Catholic faith. And that's something that's almost unheard of in the world today. I know there are many stories of folks who've left the church, children who've left the church, grandchildren who've left the church, and that can be a very difficult and painful thing for people to experience because we love them so much and we want what's best for them. So knowing my own parents' success story in that kind of gave me hope that it could work. And so I reflected back. I've been reflecting back for many years now on what my parents did right. How did they do that? And many times people will hear about my faithful upbringing, or they'll hear that I'm a mom of 8 children that are now grown and still practicing their faith, and they want to know, like, what is that magic formula? Even for ourselves, what's the magic formula for staying Catholic, for staying true to your faith in a world that doesn't recognize its value? And so I'm here to share with you tonight, first of all, there is no magic formula. Sorry, there's no one-size-fits-all prescription for Catholic family living that guarantees your kids are going to live out their faith. And yet, there are some things that we can do that increase our chances of finding success in that important job. So I'm encouraged by other people's success stories, and I'm going to share some of my own successes and failures. But it's not that simple that you can just say, well, just do this one thing. And I understand the temptation. And sometimes our culture, even within the Catholic Church, will tell us, well, just make sure your kids get to Mass, or make sure they get to religious ed, or enroll them in Catholic schools, or homeschool them, or whatever the current solution might be for this. And all those are simple. They feel like a simple solution, and we kind of want that. We want to know, what boxes do I need to check to quote-unquote guarantee that this next generation is going to remain faithful? But there aren't boxes that you can check that will guarantee that. There are things you can do that will help you and will help you access God's grace as you're growing your family, as you're raising your family, or as you're talking to your grandchildren and teaching them about the importance of the faith, that can help you to do that successfully. But at the end of the day, we always have to remember that God, because He loves us so much, He gave us free will. And He gave our kids and our grandkids free will. And sometimes, no matter what you do, you can do all the right things. And sometimes they're going to choose something other than that. Sometimes they're going to go in a different direction, something you would never choose for them. And that's a very painful thing to experience when it's somebody that you love so much, and they're not going to be open to hearing it. And yet I want to encourage anybody who has that experience going on in their lives right now to know that God's not done with their story yet. I've seen many people and many stories of people who've gone astray even after they've been given a firm foundation of faith, and then they do come back. It's not ever a guarantee. This is part of the risk that we take in loving young people, in bringing children into the world, is that they're not always going to listen to us, and they're not always going to understand what we really want to give them, which is this tremendous gift of faith. But I'm going to talk about some of the things that we can do correctly to help our families to grow in holiness. So St. John Paul II, I'm a great fan of St. John Paul II. My husband calls him my boyfriend, and I don't correct him. So I think he's really a great man, a great and holy man, who's such a gift to the church. And so a quote from him is, "As the family goes, so goes the nation, and so goes the whole world in which we live." This is how important the family is. And we are always learning in the family. The family is what all of our culture, all of our society is built on. So if you can do that part right, if you can get that part right, and I don't mean perfect when I say get it right, if you can do that part right, you're going to grow in virtue, and you're going to firm your kids up in a foundation of faith that's a gift that you can give them for their entire lifetime. St. John Paul II also called the family the school of virtue. That means you're learning there. You're in school, in family life. So St. Francis de Sales once said, "You learn to speak by speaking, to study by studying, to run by running, to work by working. In just the same way, you learn to love by loving." I think that's so beautiful, because it doesn't mean you have to perfectly have figured out how to love in order to get started. And that's what family life is all about. Where are we learning in this school? We're learning in the family. And the good news is, although we're going to mess up sometimes, we're going to fall short of that perfect love in our family life, there's always another opportunity. There's always another occasion for you to practice that love. So we're going to talk a little bit about the fact that our family lives are so important, and sometimes that's what keeps us up at night. We're worried about the next generation. We're worried about our kids and our grandkids and what kinds of choices they're making, but that we don't do it all on our own. God doesn't ask us to do any of it on our own. We do it through God's grace. And any kind of quote-unquote success you might find in your family life is by the grace of God. We can't take credit for it. Whenever anybody would ever compliment me on something about my family, I would always say, I can't take the credit, because you know what? I don't also want the blame. I don't want the blame when it goes awry, when someone makes a choice that I didn't want for them. And it's so true. Our children belong to God first. So it's important to remember that. So I'm going to share here tonight 5 things that I've noted about Catholic families, both from my own upbringing but also in my own experience of raising a family. But before I get to that, I just want to encourage you to know that this is hard. It's important to admit that it's hard. It's a challenging thing. That doesn't mean we're not called to it, but God's going to give you the grace for it. And sometimes it feels like the grace comes a little slowly. We don't always feel up to that task. So if you find family life challenging, whatever kind of family you were raising or have raised, or the extended family that you're interacting with now, if you find that difficult, join the club. Nobody feels like a natural at it. I think sometimes that's what we get caught up in. And we need each other. Women need other women of faith to encourage and support them and affirm them in their natural feminine gifts. And men need the same. They need male friendships. I always tell women, do you know that we women have a primary need to communicate our thoughts and our feelings to a non-judgmental listener? And do you also know that your husband is an unlikely candidate for that job? That's not what he's for, right? You need a girlfriend for that job. You need a woman who gets it, who's not going to try to fix your problem the minute you emote about it, who's going to listen and say, oh, honey, that must be so hard. And sometimes that's all we need. That's not why God gave you a husband. That's not why God put the good men that he put in your life. Not for that. We need a network of people who understand us. And none of us is a natural at Catholic family life, family living of any kind. It's a school. We're learning by doing it. And that doesn't mean you're going to get it perfect the first time out of the gate. We need to make peace with that kind of imperfection. Not embracing the imperfection, not giving up and trying, but always trying again, always getting up again, saying we're sorry when we need to. And knowing that it doesn't come naturally to any of us, it's difficult, It's hard, but God calls us to it and he gives us the grace for it. He sees us in our mess and he is not discouraged. Sometimes when you feel called to something, whether it's raising children or being in the life of your grandchildren, it can feel so impossibly hard that you think you're not up to the task. And the good news is you're not up to the task. You cannot do it. You need God's grace to do it. Only by the grace of God can you do it. And none of us can just naturally and efficiently and effectively do it, guaranteed to raise the next generation of Catholic kids. None of us is a natural. None of us feels a natural at it. It can be really hard. So that's the first note I want to make about Catholic families. Catholic families practice love and service to others. And that's something that's hard to do. But this is where we learn to do that. It begins in the family, loving and serving one another. But it starts out difficult. And it continues to be difficult in different ways. I used to think that passage in Genesis where God tells Eve, you'll bring forth children in great pain, I thought that was referring to labor pain. And yes, in some ways it does refer to labor pain, of course, but being a mother is incredibly painful in ways you never imagined as you go throughout life, you know? He didn't explicitly mention teenagers there in the Garden of Eden, but I know he was thinking about it. We bring forth new life in pain. Women do this. And it's not going to come naturally to us. But this is the foundation of our family life, is this kind of sacrifice, this kind of self-gift. You know, I'll just tell you to let you know just how imperfectly I entered into this faith and family life. When my husband and I got married, I was 22 years old, and it was about 6 weeks after the wedding, you know, freshly back from the honeymoon. I found myself one evening sitting on the bathroom floor looking at a positive pregnancy test in tears. How's that for a natural at motherhood? And why would I cry about that? Because it wasn't my plan. How many times in life is it not going to our plan? And we're in tears over it. We're frustrated over it. God has a different plan. But I can look back at that moment now and see what God was doing. He was beginning to show me that this life that you are choosing, this vocation of family, is a sacrifice. Right from the beginning, it didn't go the way that I wanted it to. It wasn't the way I planned. I couldn't control it. And right from the beginning, God was making it clear, it's not going to go that way. I love you too much to let you make your own plans. So St. John Paul II also says, the self-giving that inspires the love of husband and wife for each other is the model and the norm for the self-giving that must be practiced in the relationships between brothers and sisters and the different generations living together in the family. The foundation of family life is sacrificial giving. And we need to model that for our kids. And one of the first ways that we can begin to teach our kids about self-sacrifice is to teach them this idea that you are not made for yourself. You're made for another. And that might mean in marriage, giving yourself to the other. It might mean in a vocation, giving yourself to the church. But you're made for someone else. You're not made for yourself. But this idea of vocation is a foreign one in our world today. You know, our world will say, you do you. Right? Do what makes you happy. Do what makes you feel good. But as parents, we know that love and sacrifice is what our faith is built on, and it's what our family lives are built on. And we need to teach that to our kids. So starting at a young age, talk to them about what their vocation might be. Affirm for them what their natural gifts are, and talk about how maybe they could use those in love and service to another. Where might God be calling you to do that? Maybe that would make you a good dad. Maybe that would make you a good priest. Talk to them about the ways they're meant to use their gifts to love and serve others. But it can be hard to accept sometimes. We need to be accepting of God's will in our lives. Like I said, from the beginning, it was a battle for me entering into family life because it wasn't going the way I planned, and that continued. God is continually inviting us into a different plan. Something that he wants that's much bigger and better for us. So when we were married and we first had our first three children, our third was a boy. His name is Ambrose. And in the first 6 months of his life, he really struggled with a lot of health issues, and we didn't know what was going on with him. And ultimately, he wound up being diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. which, thanks be to God, is a much less life-threatening illness in the world today than it was back then when he was born. But it was devastating. It was a devastating diagnosis to hear, and we knew that it was genetic, so it would affect our future family life and potentially other children. It was such a blow to me, because prior to that, we were the family, we were raising our kids hopefully well, we were going to church, we were saying the rosary. I was doing all the things for God, and I felt like he broke some unspoken deal. I felt kicked in the teeth by a God who I trusted, because again, it wasn't in the plan. And I realized I had this unspoken deal with God. And how many of us have that? Where we believe we have faith, we're doing all the right things, and it's all just outward. But something will test that faith, and that's when you know. That's when you know whether you really are faithful or not. So as much as I wouldn't have chosen that experience for me or for my son or for our family, I can see that God was calling us into deeper relationship with him through that, calling on us to trust him more. But sometimes we were talking this morning in the talk about those words, thy will be done, are so hard sometimes, so hard to hear, because we know they're going to involve sacrifice, and we're afraid of that. But we need to make time to listen to the will of God. Another great quote that I love from St. John Paul II is, family, be who you are. That's such a beautiful gift to think about that. Family, be who you are. And that leads me into our next point, which is Catholic families know who they are. They know their identity. They know their worth. They know their importance. They know the vitally important work that they're doing. And yet, so many things in our world confuse us about our identity, starting with some of the basics of our sexual identity. Our world will tell us all kinds of crazy things about that. But part of being a Catholic family is knowing your worth as a person, and knowing who you are, knowing if you're male or female, and that it matters. It matters to your vocation, whether you're male or female. Down to the basics. Every man is called in some way to be a father, and every woman is called in some way to be a mother. St. John Paul II had the audacity to teach this thing that our world rejects. We're not trying to put someone in a box. We're trying to open people up to the enormous gifts that they're meant to share with the world, and affirm them in that important work that they're called to do. So that means, does it look the same for everyone? Of course not. God's too big for that. The church is too big and diverse and beautiful for that. But every man has a fatherhood, and every woman has a motherhood. But we can't say that in the world today, because the world thinks that we're trying to limit people. I have a whole book that's called Momnipotent, in which we look at the feminine gifts that God gives to all women and the ways that we're meant to use those in service to the people in our lives and in service to the church at large. And I get a lot of feedback on that book, positive and negative. Some of the negative feedback, though, is that I'm trying to limit women's identity as mothers. And I think there's nothing more expansive than the identity of mother, because it can apply to all the different ways in our world today that we women give and love and serve the people that God places in our lives. And that looks different at every stage. You may be a mother in a very traditional sense. You might raise children, but one day those children will leave your home. And then what? You find new people to mother. I always talk about mother is a verb. It's what we do. And the same with men. You're called to be a father to people in your life, maybe to little people that you're raising in your home at one point in your life, but then when they're grown and they leave, what then? In what ways is God calling you to be a provider and protector to people in the world, to lead people in the world? And with women, what people is God calling on you to love with that self-giving, life-giving, nurturing love that we have a unique capacity for? St. John Paul II said the world is hungry for motherhood. I say the world is hungry for fatherhood. It's hungry for your motherhood and your fatherhood, as unique as it is. So we need to remember who we are, and that when we're seeking happiness in the world, we can't listen to what the world says about happiness, right? Is it your spouse's job to make you happy? I've got young adult children who are newly married and have been married for a few years, and I found this a really interesting conversation to have with them. Because the world will tell you, what do they tell you? Oh, find someone who makes you happy, right? And then what's the implication there? What happens when they no longer make you happy? like, well, then you move on to find someone new to make you happy. And then be with that person until they don't make you happy anymore. Well, the problem with this idea is every person in the world is going to fail to make you happy, truly happy. It's not your spouse's job to make you happy. It's your spouse's job to get you to heaven. And sometimes that's going to feel pretty hard. It's not going to make you very happy. I married the man that I consider the closest to perfection here on earth, and there are some days that man is not making me happy. It's okay. You know, I used to love to see, like, when I'd go through the grocery checkout, the women's magazines, and they'd have, like, headlines like, "Are you and your spouse compatible?" Compatible. Take our quiz. I love that because the word compatible, the roots, mean suffer together. So what those quizzes are asking you, are you and your spouse, you and your mate, are you compatible? Are you prepared to suffer together? That's what the church would ask you if you're planning to get married. Are you prepared to suffer together? If you are, then you're ready to get married and you're ready to enter into family life, but not before. Because your spouse isn't meant to make you happy. Only God can make you happy. That's a God job. That doesn't mean there isn't a lot of joy in marriage and family life, but only God can truly make you happy. Even our secular culture knows this. It's seeking. You can see this everywhere once you open your eyes to it. Listen to even popular music, right? Bruce Springsteen, everybody's got a hungry heart. What's he talking about? Everybody does have a hungry heart. I don't know if he's read St. Augustine, but St. Augustine said, "Thou hast made us for thyself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in thee." Restless hearts. We're made for God. And this needs to be part of your identity, not only knowing who you are, but who you are made for, what your purpose is. So Catholic families know who they are, male and female, and it matters. It's a beautiful gift. And to know that you were made for this purpose, and part of your identity is being male or female, being a mother or a father, that you have a unique gift to give, not only in your family life, but to the world at large. It's so important for families to know that. So remember what John Paul II said, families, be who you are. It's a powerful gift. Step into that. And part of knowing who you are, identity as family, is identifying as family, building a family culture. When we first started having children, my husband Dan would always talk about family culture, like the importance of family culture. And I'll be honest, I was way too busy, like looking for lost buckle shoes and boiling pots of spaghetti to care much about culture. I didn't want to be talking about culture. What are you talking about? But he was such a gift in leading our family in this way because he wanted to know, like, what is part of our family culture? And every family culture is going to look different. Of course, your faith is the foundation of it, but what are the things that make you uniquely who you are as a family? What are those things that remind you who you are as a family? Do you identify as a family? And this is so important. I remember one time many years ago when our kids were still pretty young, we took a family road trip, a vacation, and we live in New Hampshire, and we had driven down, and we had spent like a week in Florida, and we were making our way back up in our giant 12-passenger van. It was epic road trips. And, you know, we had gotten on each other's nerves in all kinds of ways throughout that trip, but it's always an epic adventure when you hit the road together as a family. And I remember we went to Mass, we stopped in South Carolina, we went to Mass at a place we had never been before, and, you know, when you have that many kids, you tend to stand out. So I knew that we stood out in this parish, and the priest didn't recognize us, but as we were leaving, we were all going out in the parking lot, and I was like getting the kids in toward the van, and the priest wanted to meet us. He wanted to know who we were, and so he just called out across the parking lot, "Hey, family." And I just loved this because every one of my kids turned around like they knew, we're family, right? We're the family, okay. And they identified with that. So important for your kids to know that, to know they're part of something bigger, where you've got each other's backs. And you know what? Part of that is encouraging them from a young age to take responsibility for one another. That idea of love and sacrifice for one another. And sometimes we don't want to do this because it requires work for us as the caregivers. We got to teach them that. We got to reinforce it. So knowing who you are, but not only knowing who you are, but who you're made for. So Catholic families know who they are. All right, my third principle of Catholic family life is that Catholic families are unafraid to seek the truth. So my dad was a philosophy professor at a Catholic college, He retired at the age of 79 just a few years ago. He was there for so many years. And he's, in every way, this personality of the totally impractical philosopher and professor. We love him for it. But he instilled in us this lifelong love of learning. He never wants to stop learning. He's still learning today at the age of 82. And this lifelong lesson he's given me through his example is so beautiful. So let me tell you a little bit about his faith background. My dad was raised by two fallen away Catholics. And when he had one brother who was older than him, and when he was about 14 years old, he was in the Boy Scouts, and he wanted to earn his faith badge. So he was looking into what you do for that, and he's like, okay, I need a religion. I haven't been raised in any particular religion, I need a religion. And so then he started investigating. He went to the library and took out books and started reading, and ultimately found himself reading St. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, and that man read himself into the Catholic Church at the age of 14. What a beautiful thing. We can't all do this, right? He's brilliant. But that lesson stays with me, that example of seeking. One of the greatest gifts that my parents gave to me in my upbringing, and one I've endeavored to give to our own children along with my husband Dan, is knowledge that the truth exists and that we can know it. The world will tell you everything's relative. Do what you want, you have your truth. That's one of my favorite things when they're like, well, I'm just telling my truth, right? Like we all have our own unique individual truth. Then that doesn't mean anything. There's the truth, and we can seek it and we can know it. And that's one of the gifts in our church, that we're not afraid of any questions. Bring it. Bring all of your hardest questions. So I look to my dad's example of always seeking, always learning. And not just about our faith. He had this great, and he still has it today, we used to call them his phases he would go through, where he would intently study something. For a while it was botany. He was intently studying botany, and he had all the books, he was reading, he was always reading. But then it was so embarrassing for us kids, because I was a teenager at the time, and he would pull over the car and climb a tree to take some photos and take a sample home for a particular tree, and we were all just rolling our eyes in the car like, Dad, oh my gosh. But then he went through a phase of baking bread. He learned how to bake bread, and he was making loaves for everybody. And then he went through a phase of metalwork. He decided he needed to learn how to do all kinds of metalwork. So, these are crazy examples, and we're not all going to be that crazy professor, right? We're not all that personality type. But every one of us has access to the fullness of truth in our Catholic Church. It's an enormous gift. We have access to the wisdom of saints. It's an enormous gift. We're not afraid of any questions. You might be afraid of some questions. Your kids or your grandkids or your students might bring you questions that you don't immediately know the answer for, and that's okay. It's a good thing. We can together find out the answers. You can model for them that lifelong seeking of the truth, that lifelong love of learning. You can teach them that there is a truth and we can know it. There is right and wrong and we can know the difference. And here's how. What a beautiful gift that is. And one thing that I've witnessed in my own experience and with my siblings is that when you know it, and when you have a parent like that who models it for you, that knowledge of the truth, that firmness in the faith, that you never truly disbelieve it. I had some siblings who strayed from the faith for a while, were doing other things and figuring life out, but they all came back. Because even when I made decisions that I knew weren't right in my young adulthood, I knew what was right. And that's been my prayer for my kids as they've grown. And when they go away to school especially, you're very worried for them, right? And it's always been my prayer, like, Lord, let them not choose wrongly. But if they should choose wrongly, Lord, let them know it is wrong. That's a gift. It's a gift you can give to your kids and your grandkids. But I always appreciated when I was growing up and we tried to do the same with our kids, like encourage them to bring their friends home. My dad used to encourage us to bring all of our friends home, people with no faith background at all. Let them ask all of their questions. Let them ask the hard questions. Let them challenge our faith. We're only firmed up in that. And you need to culture-proof your family. What do I mean by that? So when you're seeking the truth, you need to be unafraid to actually talk about some things that are right and wrong. And some of these things are not going to be politically correct. Some of these things are going to be uncomfortable conversations to have. But you know what? You need to have those difficult conversations. Say the word sex to your kids. Because if you're not imparting your values to your kids, the world will gladly do it for you. If you're not willing to, the world will raise your kids for you with its own values, and they will not be yours. So be proactive and address the things that they're going to find in the world, the questions that their peers will bring to them, the questions that they'll have even just after listening to the news or seeing what's going on in the world. It can be uncomfortable sometimes, but then think about what a beautiful example of the faith your family can be if you're unafraid and you invite others in and you're open to their questions. I remember years ago, my son, when he was in high school, he had a friend named Kayla, and they were working on a science project together. So she was over on a Saturday afternoon, and they were working on this project together. And then it came to be almost evening time, and so I just invited her to stay for dinner. And I don't know what we had for dinner. It was not a fancy dinner. It was just family dinner, you know? And afterwards, some kids played board games, and Kayla stayed to play the board games. And I remember when she was leaving, she stopped at the door and she said, "Mrs. Bean, thank you for having me come and eat dinner with your family and stay for a little while. I didn't know people did stuff like this anymore." What a sad commentary on our culture. Something as basic as family meals, family spending time together, enjoying that time together. You know, Pope Francis used to encourage families to waste time together. I think that's such a beautiful way of phrasing it. Where do you waste time? Because we all waste time. Do you waste it watching TV or scrolling through your phone? Waste time together. Spend that time together. There's no replacing it. Quality time is quantity time. It happens in that way, spending that time together. But also just being open to their questions. You can't time exactly when your teenager is going to come to you and ask you an important question about the faith. They need to feel comfortable with you. They need to trust that you are going to speak the truth to them. And that happens over the course of time, being open to them. So spending that time together and having the uncomfortable conversations sometimes is important. All right, the next principle I want to mention is that Catholic families put God and family first. This is sometimes a really countercultural thing to do, especially if you're raising kids in the world today where most people are worshiping sports, organized sports in place of God. And our kids have been involved in all kinds of sports. I very much value sports, but not over God, right? I remember when my oldest son was on the baseball team, I called his coach because he had practice on Good Friday, and I just was explaining to him, my son won't be there because it's Good Friday. And my son overheard this conversation. He almost died. "How dare you tell my coach I can't be there because it's Good Friday? It's so embarrassing, Mom." And yet I just did it, and we did it again and again and again with other kids. And sometimes it makes you the weirdo, right? Sometimes you're the only one who's saying, "You know what, we have to get to Mass on that day." We can't do that. This is a priority for us. And it's so hard, but you know, I remember one time I was in a texting group of all the parents on a particular baseball team. And the coach had texted all of the parents saying, "Practice is going to be Sunday morning at 10 a.m. See you there at the field," or whatever. And I was like, "Ugh, here we go again. I'm going to have to reply and say that we're not going to be there because we're going to church." And before I could reply, though, one of the other parents I saw had replied. And the response was, "Thank you, Coach. We really appreciate all that you do, but my son won't be there because Sunday mornings are reserved for Mass, and we'll be glad to come. And it actually really would be helpful if you could consider having practices at least in the afternoon if we have to have them on a Sunday." And I was like, "Oh, phew, I'm not the only person." I was so encouraged by that. But then I looked a little closer, and it was my husband who had responded. Yeah, so we're weirdos, but at least we're weirdos together, right? We're the only ones. We're the only ones. But it really does pay off in the long run, because as much as my first son was rolling his eyes, that first uncomfortable phone call I had to make to the coach, my youngest son was playing on a baseball team just a couple of years ago, and so he was 16 years old at the time, and they were playing in a tournament that was over a weekend in a town that's a little bit far from us, and so they had played on Saturday evening, and they won, so they had qualified to play the next morning. And my son, on his own initiative, went, because this was in a town that was far from our house, he went and he researched and found out where there was a local church and what time the masses were, and he on his own went to his coach and told him, I'm going to have to be at this Mass, but I'll come afterwards. It means I'm going to miss the first half of that first game. And the coach said to him, oh, come on, Danny. We really need you in that first half of the game. Can't we just as a team all pray in our Father or something? And Danny said, well, my mom's over there in the bleachers if you want to ask her. And I didn't hear from Coach. he respected it. But I remember in that moment, I was so proud of my son for doing that. And then I thought, how far we've come, right? It pays off over time because as your family culture builds and they know they're not alone in it, they learn this is part of who we are. This is our responsibility. God comes first. It's important. These other things are also important. But what you do matters. If you're willing to shrug off Mass on any given weekend because of some other commitment, your kids see that. They know that. If you're making other things more important, if you say certain things are important to you, that's all very well and good. But I would challenge you, those things that you say are important to you, are they showing up in your calendar? And are they showing up in your bank statement? Because where you spend your time and where you spend your money is where you really value things. So are you spending your time? Are you praying together as a family? This is such a challenge, especially with having a bunch of kids when they were little. Family prayer time was a zoo. And it was so discouraging sometimes I just wanted to forget it all and just send them all to bed. And yet we persevered. It's because we knew it was important to teach them that we value this. These are our values. This is our faith. This is how we live that out. And so that's going to sometimes mean making uncomfortable and unpopular rules. It's going to be meaning making time to pray together. It's going to mean spending more time together as a family. Because not only God comes first, but your family is next after that. Not all these other commitments. So I really encourage people to take a hard look at your calendars sometimes. Do an inventory. Where are you spending your time? Because that speaks volumes to your kids. And finding that time to pray together can sometimes be really challenging. But if you're in the car, you can pray together in the car. When I was years ago driving that 12-passenger van, my kids and all their friends knew that in the front of that van was a box of rosaries. And there were times on trips where I'd just pass them around because we've got a few minutes in the car here. We're going to do this because this is important. And it's important to do it together as a family. But then making sure that your time together is enjoyable. It doesn't always have to be work. It doesn't always have to be difficult. Spend time doing fun things together. Plan time where your children and your grandchildren can enjoy just being in your presence. Maybe doing an outing together. It doesn't have to be fancy. But ask yourself, am I too busy? And most of us are, including me. You need to keep checking. Are you too busy because these other things get pushed to the side if you've got too many things going on, if your life is filled with too much distraction? And I'm so encouraged by a hilarious story that a priest friend of mine told me once about him, because we're not the only ones who struggle with this. Our priests struggle with this as well. They're too busy. Everybody is too busy. Everyone's too distracted. And this particular priest friend of mine lives in Connecticut, and he sometimes would volunteer to be a substitute to say Mass at a parish that was on Long Island, which would mean he'd have to take the ferry. He'd have to catch the ferry in time to get over for Mass. And there was one weekend where he was supposed to be saying Mass there, and he was late. He was running late because he was doing too many things at once, he said. He was in his apartment, just a complete disorganized disaster, and all of a sudden he realized what time it was, and he's rushing out the door, and he goes speeding down to the ferry, and he screeches into the parking lot, and he sees the boat there, and it's just leaving the dock. And he's like, oh my gosh, I'm not gonna make it. I'm not gonna be able to say Mass. This is a disaster. But he's like, maybe I can make it. And he grabs his things and runs down the dock, and he throws his briefcase onto the deck of this boat, and then he takes a flying leap himself and skids on his feet and then lands flat on his back on this ferry. And the employees come gathering around. They're like, Father, are you, they knew him there. Father, are you okay? And he's like, yes, I'm fine. I made it. I'm not going to be late. And then they said, well, Father, this boat is coming in. So he had leapt onto a boat that he thought was leaving the dock, but it was one that was actually coming in. And I love that he shared this story with me because it just is such a stark reminder of what happens when we're too busy. We're too distracted. We don't do things well. all of our work suffers. We think our work is so important. I need to do so much of it. I need to be doing so many things at the same time. And we wind up making fools of ourselves. So I always remember that. Remember the priest on the ferry. Ask yourself if you're too busy. All right, the last point I want to make about Catholic families is that Catholic families say and do hard things. We've alluded to this a little bit already, but no one likes to be the weirdo. No one likes to be the one who stands out, has different rules, right? In our family, I've learned this over the years, that if your kids are pretty much happy with your parenting, you're doing it wrong. You need to be making them unhappy. And I don't mean that like you're trying to make them unhappy. You're trying to reach their ultimate happiness, help them to get there. And that sometimes along the way is going to mean you set limits or you make decisions that are not popular. And we have hard rules in our family, and they were difficult to enforce, and our kids hated them for them sometimes. But one of our rules was no dating in high school. Now this is a tough one, because my husband Dan and I met in high school, and we dated in high school. And that is why we know that dating in high school is a bad idea. It was a mess. We weren't prepared for it. It wasn't what we were supposed to be doing. We were emotionally unprepared for that kind of relationship. So of course we let our kids have, friends and of both sexes, and they enjoy each other's company, and sometimes they like somebody, and all of that's very normal. We teach them that that's very normal. But none of this committed dating relationship stuff until you're more grown up and prepared for it. That was a very unpopular rule in our house. And then also no cell phones until you're 17. And even then, what you receive is a pretty locked down phone. Very unpopular. They fought that one so hard. And I knew every one of their peers, starting in second grade, had a smartphone in their pocket. So we really are up against the culture here. But it was so funny. I remember one of my sons coming and telling me, I just want a cell phone because every kid on my team has one, and they all call their mom, and she's able to pick them up right after practice because she knows when practice is over, and that's why I need a cell phone. And I said, well, you just told me every one of your peers has a cell phone, so borrow one of theirs. That was not a popular answer, but that was what he was going to get, So sometimes we have to set boundaries, we have to set limits that are not going to be popular, that our culture will not understand. Other parents aren't going to be doing the same thing, so there's this kind of parental peer pressure to everybody says it's fine, let's just jump in and do it. But we're not meant to please the world. And even as a parent, you're not meant to please your kids. That's not the goal. Jesus told us that we are meant to be the light of the world, a city set on a hill to shine before all. And I don't know about you, but that makes me feel pretty uncomfortable sometimes. I don't want to be that. And through the years when we'd pack up all of our kids in our 12-passenger van and we'd get out somewhere and they'd all be coming out, and I felt like we were like a clown car and people are like counting their heads, and it was so embarrassing. I never wanted to be that center of attention. But another quote from St. John Paul II, which he said at World Youth Day in 1993, was, "This is no time to be ashamed of the gospel. It is the time to preach it from the rooftops. Do not be afraid to break out of comfortable and routine modes of living in order to take up the challenge of making Christ known. The gospel must not be kept hidden because of fear or indifference. It was never meant to be hidden away in private. It has to be put on a stand so that people may see its light and give praise to our Heavenly Father." So you start in your own home and family, putting the gospel on a stand through your interactions with one another. And ultimately, what God's plan is for you and your family is for your family to be that light to others, that light to the world. When my kids grew and got older and they started having friendships and bringing people home, I became aware of that we were reaching beyond the four walls of our house into the community. We were meant to be an example, a light. We were meant to spread the gospel, to bring the truth to others, to teach others things they might not ever hear, that you are made by a God who loves you. John Paul II also said, do not be afraid, do not be satisfied with mediocrity. And I love that quote because the world will tell you to be satisfied with mediocrity. The world will tell you to settle. It's just too uncomfortable to push these other things, right? And yet that's what ultimately will lead to our unhappiness as parents, your kids' unhappiness. So sometimes we have to set hard rules. We have to have hard conversations with our kids. And know that you're not always going to do it perfectly. You're not. There are so many ways in the world today that you're going to fail, actually fail, at protecting your kids from outside evil influences in the world today. But I didn't always look at it this way, but I can see now that those moments when you fail, when your kids mess up, when something enters in that threatens your family, and there's so many ways, especially through the media, that this can happen in the world today. And many of us are afraid of that. Many of us are living in fear of that. We need to remember St. John Paul II's words, do not be afraid of that. It's no time to be fearful. It's no time to hide the gospel. I prefer to look at those moments now as teaching moments for ourselves and for our kids. Teach your kids, yes, do not mess up in these ways, but then also teach them by word and by example, here's what we do when we mess up. And so my kids, in those moments where we had failures, it was about engaging with them about that, talking to them about what was wrong with that thing that they did, why it's wrong, what God's plan is that's different. And the times when we messed up, teaching them through our example of humbly apologizing sometimes and teaching them, I didn't live up to our standard here, and I'm sorry for that. And teaching them we have a whole sacrament for what to do when you mess up. What a gift that is in the church. I love that our church is so prepared for this. It knows, right? Christ knows this is why he gave us the sacrament of confession. So teach them with your words, but also with your actions. And it's a lifelong project. Ultimately, we need to know this, that it's a lifelong project to be building character in our kids, establishing them a foundation of faith. It doesn't happen overnight. Pope Francis taught us that important words to say in family life are, I'm sorry, thank you, and I love you. Those are sometimes hard things to say, but they're so vitally important. And it's that simple. If you can focus on getting those things right, I'm sorry, thank you, and I love you, then all the other stuff's going to fall into place. If you can get those words and that example right. All right, just to review the 5 points that I made today. Catholic families practice love and service to others, sometimes in painful ways, but that's where we learn to love. Catholic families know who they are. Catholic families are unafraid to seek the truth. They put God and family first, and they say and do hard things. And because it all is so hard, and it's not going to happen overnight, we need to be leaning on God's grace because God calls us to it, but he doesn't leave us alone to do it. He gives us grace. I saw something the other day online where someone said, yes, Jesus turned water into wine, but ordinary people had to fill the jars first. And I like to think that that's what we're doing in family life. We're filling the jars. We're filling our kids with good things, teaching them good things through our words and our examples, and then allowing God to work in them, because ultimately it's his work and it's his goal for them. So I'm going to leave you today with this encouragement to know that you're not alone, that you're not perfect, and your family will never be perfect, and your kids will never be perfect, your grandkids will never be perfect. It's a broken and fallen world, but that our church is prepared for that, and that God gives you the grace to get through that, and that you are exactly who God called to be in the place that you are in your family today, whether it's as a parent or a grandparent. You are exactly the people that those young people need in their lives today. I want to thank you. God bless you. Know that I'll be praying for you. And I'm going to be, yes, thank you. I'm going to, unfortunately, I need to leave right away to catch my flight. I would have loved to stay and hear from you. I always love to hear people's stories and the things that they'll share about their family lives. But if you want to reach out, you can connect with me through my website, which is daniellebean.com. I would love to connect with you in that way, and know that I'll be praying for you. I always pray for the communities where I speak before I speak, and then once I've met the people there in an even more precious way, I'm able to pray for you. So I'll be praying for you. Thank you. God bless you.